Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. We talk about all things vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this show is something that you look forward to checking in with every single week. Well, it's been a hot one this week in Utah, hasn't it? I know for me, I'm battling squash bugs on my pumpkin and some of my zucchinis. I'm trying to keep my chickens cool in this crazy heat, but I am getting my first zucchinis, which is fun, and lots of beets. My tomatoes are, I've got so many that are, just a halfway green. I started my tomatoes a little late this year, so some of y'all may be quite a bit ahead of me, but I'm excited for what's to come in the garden for sure. I've started to divide some of my iris patches that, haven't been divided in a couple years, and all my daylilies are in bloom, which are so amazing. I'm such a fan of unique and rare varieties of daylilies, as well as iris too. But daylilies I really enjoy because they're kind of blooming in the heat of the summer when a lot of the perennials aren't really out in full force. Anyway, so on today's show, we're going to be doing part 2 of the lawn care episode that we did on episode 13 with Eric Marble from Chanshare Sod Farms. And let me tell you what, this is a fire episode packed with everything you need to know about growing a proper lawn here in Utah, which is an art form all on its own. So stay tuned because we will be talking with Eric today. We also have a special segment at the end of the show that is answering listeners' questions that posted them to us on our Instagram page, which is at Gardening Utah, or on the Utah Gardeners Facebook group. So I'm excited for you guys to hear Eric answer your questions on this episode. So let's get into that in a minute. But first, the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is control your squash bugs now. Now listen up. If you've got pumpkin or squash growing in your garden, the squash bug, or Anasa tristis, is primarily a pest of cucurbits, which is squash, pumpkin, melon, and cucumber, but primarily they go after your squash and your pumpkin. So what do they look like? Well, the adults are about 5/8 of an inch long, and they're gray to brownish black. The wings are kind of folded over like a flat back, and they're kind of smelly when you squash them. Now the nymphs, or the babies that are coming out, which are coming out now, by the way, they're smaller and they have an antenna and legs, and they have kind of white to greenish gray bodies, and they tend to be in clusters all together. Now the eggs on the plant, which are almost always underneath the leaves, they're oval and they're a yellowish brown to like a brick color, and the eggs darken in color as they mature, and they're laid in clusters next together of 12 to 20 eggs on the undersides of the leaves or between the leaf veins. So what do squash bugs do? My goodness, what do they not do? They multiply like crazy. Every single every single squash bug can lay up to 250 eggs in her life cycle. So every time you get a squash bug, you're preventing 250 into the future. So what do they do to your plants? The plant injury includes leaf necrosis, scarred fruit, and really rapid plant wilt. And if you don't get control of the squash bug, they will take your plant. They also have a resistance to insecticides, and the adults are really difficult to kill. So the best management at this point in the season, with the adults especially, is achieved by literally suppressing them when you see them, and look for the eggs on the underside of the leaves, or nymphs when they're first detected. And so, yep, a little bit of elbow grease there. There is a spray regimen that you can do. You can use like a 7 spray that you can use to be preventative. The squash bugs are attracted to the scent of the flower, and so they can fly to your plant and just start to take it over. So if you spray a 7 spray in the morning, just covering the crown, you don't need to worry about the leaves, but just kind of the base of the plant, and you do it really early in the morning before the bees are active and the flowers open. If you do that every 14 days, that can keep on top of them. I personally have a beehive pretty close to my squash plants, so I don't personally do this. I use elbow grease and I go out and I tackle them myself. But other people do. If you have too many plants, you could spend a half of a day picking squash bugs. So 7 is a really, a recommended way to try to get on top of at least the nymphs once the eggs hatch. But preventative cultural and mechanical controls should really be the first line of defense. So careful observation is number 1. Go out and monitor your squash and your pumpkin crops. Look for them. The best way to find them, get a hose and drench your plant right at the base, not on the leaves, but put the water right on the base of the plant and just watch what happens. And you will see them. They come crawling up from underneath the base. They have this crazy way of hiding and they'll just come running up. So do you want to know what I do? I literally take a pair of kitchen tongs that are just in my garden, just for use in my garden. And I go prepared with a little bucket of soap and water, and I literally pick them off one by one by one by one by one. Now that's harder if you have any newly hatched nymphs, but with the adults, it's really easy to just grab those suckers and put them in the bowl. So, because they cannot swim, and that's a way to prevent them. Now, sometimes I will take out duct tape, and this sounds a little weird, but if I see a whole bunch of nymphs crowded all together, I will just grab the duct tape and stick it to them. And try to do it in a way it doesn't rip up your plant, but you know what I'm saying. You just kind of get it on the base of the nymphs and they come right off. So early detection is important because those smaller nymphal stages are easier to control with the insecticides, as I mentioned, but early detection will really allow for successful mechanical control by smashing adults and egg masses before they become a problem. And each adult, like I said, that is eliminated could reduce the future squash bug population by several hundred. Now, you should monitor your plant at least once a week. Go out there and just spend some squash bug time and really have a look. Some people like to do it every day, but really if you get on a regimen and you monitor it at least once a week, you can keep them under control. And again, drench the plant right at the base and they'll come running up. And you can do a spray regimen to prevent the nymphs, to grab the nymphs when you can. They won't really touch the adults or the eggs, but it will get the nymphs if you just spray the crown every 14 days with 7. So good luck, everyone. I wish you well in your quest to prevent squash bugs. I know I'm doing the same thing you are. Pay attention to your garden and it will, you can prevent a lot of problems.
And that was the tip of the week.
Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Okay, when we come back right after this quick break, we are going to be talking with Eric Marble from Chanshare Sod Farms all about proper mowing, proper watering, and weed control in your lawn. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Okay, Gardening Utah listeners, you are in for a real treat. This is part 2 of episode 13. It's a continuation of my conversation with Eric Marble from Chanshare Sod Farms, where he was giving us the full tips and tricks on everything you need to do to have the perfect lawn. And so this episode is going to dig into mowing practices as well as weed care. Have a listen, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and I've got Eric Marble from Chanshare Sod here in our virtual studio, and he is just like chucking down the sod and grass.
It's like drinking from a fire hose. I know. You get me started talking about lawn maintenance, and I'm just like, blah, 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 blah. Just take this and this. So I apologize to your listeners right now, Jana. I am sorry.
No way.
Throwing so much information at you so quickly.
Don't apologize for being a lawn genius. So,
Oh, stop.
okay, so one thing you mentioned in the last episode that I think a lot of people may forget is, especially when you're just in your routine, you're mowing every weekend or whenever you mow, is it's really important to sharpen your blades at least twice a year so that you're cutting the lawn and not tearing it. So you're going to tell us a lot more mowing tips.
Yeah. So what we talked about in the last segment was the fact that, number one, like, maintain your lawnmower. It's really important to have that. And to have a sharp blade is always going to treat your lawn a lot better than if you're like tearing it with a dull blade. So, and what we said before was the proper way to maintain your lawn is about 2.5 to 3 inches. And the reason why you want to have it that long is because that will shade the soil from the heat of the sun. And so you won't actually get as much evaporation of the water on the surface if you have a longer blade, because it actually kind of clumps in and it makes sure that the sun doesn't take away all of the water from evaporation. So that's a really important thing. That's why we want to have it at about 2.5 to 3 inches. I know that some people like to have shorter lawns and they have it well manicured and everything like that, but your lawn's going to be much healthier if it has a longer blade there. A lawn, it's a green plant. It has to participate in photosynthesis. And the great thing about it is a 5,000 square foot lawn provides enough oxygen for 4 adults every day. So, if you're thinking about kind of the environmental and the health benefits that actually come from that, that's something that people don't really think about as far as green spaces go. But it's something that, you've got these hundreds of thousands of plants that are creating oxygen and consuming carbon dioxide. And so actually having a lush, healthy landscape helps you. It's a healthy thing. So
wow.
Anyway, that's just a sidebar. Let's go back to the mowing a little bit.
I love that.
So we talked about the height that you should mow your lawn at and the fact that you should maintain your lawnmower, really well. Make sure that you at least once a year sharpen your blade. The other thing is it's best if you are able to mulch the clippings and leave them on your lawn, because what happens when you mulch the clippings is clippings are about 70% water, and then the rest are nitrogen and other things that when they break down and go back into the soil, they actually feed your lawn. So a mulching lawnmower is much better than one where you have to bag all of the clippings, because it returns water, air, and even nutrients into the soil, and that makes it so that you don't have to fertilize quite as much. So have a sharp blade, mulch your clippings. If you ever see like piles of clippings, then you want to rake those out. The clippings will create a thatch layer, and the thatch layer is basically a layer of dead material that's decomposing and going back into the soil. But what it does is it prevents weeds from growing in your lawn. So if you have a healthy lawn that has an adequate thatch layer, then it prevents the weeds from getting in there, and it promotes health in the roots and in the blades, because it's returning all those nutrients back to the plant. So those are kind of the basics as far as mowing goes. So let's talk a little bit about weed control.
Yeah.
The best form of weed control is to have a healthy lawn, because those roots will knit close together and they'll choke out any weeds that come in. But we do recommend a couple of different applications. Like in the spring, when you put on your fertilization in around Memorial Day, a weed and feed with broadleaf weed control in it is recommended. That'll keep like the dandelions and the broadleaf weeds like that from creeping up. Now here's something that'll scare you a little bit. If you let a dandelion to the point where it has those seeds on it, you'll be fighting that dandelion for 7 years.
What?
Yeah. So if it goes to seed, if any weed goes to seed in your lawn, you're going to have a tough time keeping that out of your lawn. So we recommend that anytime you see, and if you want to be completely organic, here's a couple of tips for you as far as weed control goes. If you don't want to use an herbicide on your lawn, then the best form of weeding, there's two different things that I could recommend that you do. First of all, you could just pull it up by hand. And if you're going to do that, make sure that you get as much of the root as you can. Because if you just pull the top of the weed, it's going to continue to grow. However, if you start getting as far down as you can into the soil bed, then that's going to get it out. Another thing that you can do is you can pull that weed out, and then you can take, this is a little bit of an arduous process, but you can take boiling water and just pour it down in the hole where that weed was, and it will burn the roots of that weed. And then most of the lawns that are in Utah are rhizomatic, which means that they regrow themselves. They grow several different blades off of one root. And so they're able to regrow themselves. And so if you pour boiling water down a hole that a weed was in, then that will kill that weed, and then the grass will naturally just kind of take over and fill in that area. So
whoa.
Now one thing, sorry, I keep I'm going to keep going.
I love that. Keep going.
So one other thing, people worry about foreign grasses getting in their lawns. And so you'll see kind of barnyard grass, orchard grass, and those are hard to separate from your lawn. If you look for a product like Weed B Gone Max Plus, it has one of the active ingredients in it called hydrochloride. Quinclorac. Let me go back. Why don't you clap?
Okay.
So if you've got some of those foreign grasses like orchard grass or whatever in your lawn, then look for a product that has the active ingredient of quinclorac. Quinclorac. If that active ingredients will work on foreign grasses, but it won't ruin rye, fescue, or bluegrass. Most lawns in Utah are bluegrass lawns. And again, as we've talked about before, if you maintain it correctly, a bluegrass lawn can be extremely water-wise and extremely healthy and efficient on water. And that's what we need here in the Utah area. So again, in the spring, you want to add a weed and feed and just look for one that has broadleaf weed control. Towards the end of May, the beginning of June, you want to apply a grub control. I've noticed, like yesterday, I was walking across my lawn and I had an area that I thought just wasn't getting enough water. And I checked the sprinklers, and the pattern for the sprinklers was correct, but that one area was just, it wasn't greening up like the rest of the lawn. And I went out and I looked this morning, and it wasn't just a uniform gray spot. It was there was kind of like this little path, like a squirrely little path. And it started growing a little bit more. And that was a telltale sign to me that I have grubs in my lawn. And so if you put a season-long grub control on towards the middle to the end of May, then that should prevent your lawn from getting eaten up by those bugs that may be on the top or the top layer of the soil.
Wow. Okay. That's a really good tip. Really good tip. And so the blend of grasses, it's Kentucky Blue, correct?
Right. That's what we recommend, and that's what we sell to homeowners on residential, because Kentucky bluegrass there are some very water-wise strains of Kentucky bluegrass, and it's very aggressive at regrowing itself. So if you have an area that has been affected by bugs or by weeds or whatever, it's able to regrow it. It's rhizomatic, like I told you before. It shoots up more than one blade off of each stem or each root that goes down into the soil. And those rhizomes, those hair roots, kind of creep over and fill in, and that's what creates that strong barrier for weeds to pop up in that lawn.
And would you recommend, because this is Gardening Utah, and I know we do have a lot of listeners down in southern Utah. So is there a different blend of grass you suggest for southern Utah?
Warm season grasses are a little bit different than cool season grasses. Cool season grasses are definitely ones, and they're the ones that they need to be able to withstand the winter months where they get a hard freeze. Down in southern Utah, you don't get that as much, but bluegrass is still a really good, a blend of bluegrass is really good. And we recommend that instead of doing different grasses, like some people will do bluegrass rye seed blends in order to kind of balance everything out. But what we found is that when you do that, you'll have areas that have like the rye grass, and you'll get kind of a clump of rye grass, and then you'll get some clumps of bluegrass. The warm season, there are some grasses like zoysia and St. Augustine and that do better in the cool season, in the warm season climates. But down in St. George, I would still recommend just a bluegrass blend down there as well. Interesting.
Okay. And do you guys deliver down there? Or is it available down there?
We don't go all the way to St. George. We cover basically from about Nephi. We go up into Montana. We do Wyoming and Nevada and Idaho a little bit there. But we go as far south as Nephi on our regular residential stuff.
Okay, well, shout out to Montana and Idaho and Wyoming then, because we do have listeners in every one of those states. Believe it or not, our podcast analytics will show me every day that people in Boise and Great Falls, Montana, and Casper, Wyoming, and Jackson, Wyoming. So we've got listeners up there. So yeah, Get yourself some Chanshare Sod. Okay, well, when we come back, we're going to talk more with Eric Marble from Chanshare Sod. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jenna Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT.
Back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis, and I'm here with Eric Marble from Chanshare Sod in our virtual studio. And we're going to talk more. Heck yeah. So we're going to talk about all the other tips and tricks that we need to cover for all of our listeners. And one of the questions that I had was, when is the best time to plant sod? I mean, if people are putting in their local scape coming up soon, is there a better time of year than that?
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about kind of the cycles of the grass and how it has a burst of energy in the spring and in the fall. And spring and fall are the best time to plant sod. Anytime it gets over 85 degrees, putting your sod down is going to require a little bit more fertilization and a little bit more water. Now, that's not to say you can't install the sod in the middle of the summer, but the absolute best time is the spring or the fall. And it's because there's less evaporation of water. There's generally more natural water that comes from storms or whatever. And then the cooler temperatures allow that root system to really grow a lot quicker if you do it in the spring or the fall.
Got it. Now, what if you are like me and you've planted a lawn in the last 7 years, but you're just not happy with your soil? Give me some tips and tricks. If your soil sucks, how do you fix it?
Soil's a hard thing because your sublayers of soil that you have is something that it's a little bit difficult to amend. But one thing to think about you should probably, if your lawn is getting a good amount of use on a regular basis, then you should aerate 1 to 2 times a year. And what happens with aeration is it breaks up the soil, and that allows more air, water, and nutrients to get down into the roots of your lawn. And so make sure that you aerate 1 to 2 a year. And when you aerate, we recommend either, if you plug aerate, that you leave the plugs on the lawn so that they can break down and return those nutrients to the soil. Or if you're able to find somebody that tine aerates, then that's better than plug aeration, because what that does is it goes down. A tine is like a little knife, and it goes down into the soil and then it vibrates. And what that does is it just it breaks up the soil even further than if you were to plug aerate.
What? It's like a
So-
little mini earthquake.
Yeah, it really is. It's really similar to that. But a lot of times what happens is that soil gets compacted to the point where air, water, and nutrients can't get down to the root layer. And so making sure that you aerate on a regular basis is something that you can do. Another thing is to get a soil test, because it could be that your pH levels of your soil are too high or too low. And so, again, USU Extension Services has a great program where they can come out and they can do a soil test for you. Or you can go to your local hardware store and purchase a soil test and send it in. And that will tell you how much the pH is on your lawn. And you want to just have a balance. You don't want to have it too salty or too alkali, and because sometimes those can cause the roots not to grow as much. But I would say the first thing to do, if you feel like you've got soil issues, figure out the type of soil that you have, figure out what the chemical makeup of your soil is, and then adjust accordingly.
So one of the questions we get a lot is power raking. And I've heard that that's not a very good thing to do to your lawn. And some people think it's good. So break the myth.
Okay, so we talked a little bit before about the thatch layer. What power raking does is it removes that thatch layer. And unfortunately, most of the time when people power rake, they damage the plant. And so instead of power raking, you got to just use a little bit of elbow grease. Grab a metal rake and just in the spring, rake off your lawn. And that will clear out the dead parts that are preventing air, water, and nutrients to go down to the soil. And it kind of tickles the plants too and wakes them up gently. So instead of power raking, we recommend just getting out there and using your arms and getting a good workout and dragging that across there. Again, you don't want to completely remove the thatch layer, because the thatch layer helps you to create kind of a natural weed barrier. Yeah. And if you don't do power raking properly, then it will damage the plant, which could cause more problems. But as you say that, one thing that you need to look at, especially in Utah, if we've had snow and a good snow year, then you want to rake sometime in the middle of the spring, because that will remove any snow mold that may have happened throughout the winter. So like you said, power raking maybe not recommended, but make sure that you do rake it up so that you can prevent the snow mold and not damage the plant.
Got it. Okay, next question. A lot of people will think, I'll save so much money if I just seed my lawn. But I hear so many people regretting that because they end up with so many weeds. So talk to me about that.
Well, and that's a difficult thing. Like seeding a lawn, if you have the time to maintain it and you're willing to stay off of your lawn for a good 2 to 3 months in order for it to grow in, then you can do that. That's not a problem. But the biggest thing is for those first couple months, you can't really prevent weeds from coming in. And if you put sod on your lawn, on your landscape, and again, you've already got that thatch layer and you've already got that natural weed barrier, and so it's able to prevent the weeds from coming up. So hydro seeding is okay. Seeding your lawn yourself is okay as long as you're willing to maintain it. Bluegrass seed takes anywhere between 14 and 21 days to germinate. And then after it's germinated, you have to keep it wet for long enough to where that root system starts to really start producing those rhizomes. So you have to keep off of it from 2 to 3 months, sometimes even as long as a full season. And then you can't worry about the weeds and putting any kind of herbicide on it for like several months until it's well established. So like those are just kind of the drawbacks to doing it. If you've got the time and the energy and you're able to keep people off of it for long enough, then sometimes it can be less expensive to do it that way. But most people don't have that time. And so because of that, laying sod is a more economical way to do it.
Gotcha. Would you believe we're almost out of time? This is crazy. We could talk about
I've got more we could talk about.
I know. This is insane. All right. When we come back right after this quick break, we are going to answer listener questions with Eric. So these are questions, very common questions that Utahns have asked either on the Utah Gardeners Facebook group, and if you're not a part of that, you should definitely join, or on the Gardening Utah Facebook page, or on the Gardening Utah Instagram. So these are user-submitted questions, and we're going to get to all of those questions and more right after this. Stay with us on Gardening Utah.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jenna Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jenna Francis. And again, I've got Eric Marble from Chanshare Sod Farms here to answer your burning question.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, so the Utah Gardens page and the Gardening Utah Instagram have gone crazy asking us their most burning questions for their lawn. And so let's get right into it. The first question here is from, an awesome person, Cynthia B. from Localscapes, who we both really think is awesome.
Oh, yeah, I love Cynthia. She's awesome.
She's so amazing. I know. So she says, Eric is so knowledgeable. Can you ask him why you shouldn't be fertilizing your lawn in July, and also maybe about what color July green is for lawn?
So, and that's a great question from Cynthia. And like, really what we do, we recommend that you fertilize 4 times a year. And that would be the fertilizations would be on Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day. And then the most important one of the year is on Halloween. It's easy to remember those holidays. But the reason why you don't fertilize in the middle of the summer is because anytime the temperatures go above about 80 degrees, 85 degrees Fahrenheit, it really stunts the growth of the grass plant. And so both the leaves of the plant and the roots of the plant slow down really so that they don't require as much water. And so if you're putting fertilizer on in the middle of the summer, in the dead heat of the summer, then it's going to kind of pull that plant out of its natural progression and stress it out a little bit. And so the other part of her question was, so that's the reason why you don't fertilize between, say, mid-July and then the end of August because of those high temperatures. And then she asked about like summer green and the difference between summer green and like the spring green. The spring green is like a lime green. It's a really bright, vibrant lime green. And then as the temperatures kind of level out a little bit before they hit that 85 degree mark, they go down more into a forest green. And then in the heat of the summer, when that heat is high, then it'll go to more of a bluish green or a bluish gray. And that's perfectly fine to do. A lot of people freak out and they want that deep, 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 deep green through the middle of the summer. And that's okay. It does require a lot more inputs in order to keep it that way. But if you have created a lawn that has a really deep root system, then even in the middle of the summer, you can keep kind of that more verdant green without having to apply extra water. We do recommend that sometime during the year, you take about a 3-week period where you just kind of brown out your lawn and you don't give it any water. And that's really good to do in those high temperatures. It'll turn brown. It'll turn almost look like it's dead. But if it's a bluegrass lawn or a rhizomatous lawn like that, once you put the water back onto it, it just springs back to life. Now, browning it out, what that does is that puts the grass into kind of a shock state, and it'll start just freaking out, and it'll push those roots down further and further into the soil. And when those roots go further into the soil, they can pull from a greater water table. And so during the middle of the summer, that's the greatest time to do that brownout. And then after about 3 weeks, you just go back to your normal watering schedule and make sure that you're watering deep and infrequently rather than doing short cycles.
Okay, I had not heard of the brownout, and so this is blowing my mind. It's a new concept for sure. I think if anything, you're right. I mean, in the heat of the summer, when you're feeling guilty watering your lawn anyway, and it does require so much, it is the perfect time to do that. I love that.
Yeah. And, I mean, your neighbors may be just like, you may have some green envy there, but really it creates a much healthier plant if you stress it out a little bit like that.
That is a really interesting concept. I love it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go. So we also have a question here from Nicolia. I hope I said her name right. And she says, is there a good way to level out the bumps without starting from scratch and laying new sod or seed?
Okay. Well, Nicolia, thanks for the question. There are a couple different things that we need to address before I give you an answer to that. And first of all, if the bumps were there before you put your grass on, then it's probably important you've got some compaction there. And so you need to make sure that you break up the compaction a little bit. And you can do that with aeration. But if you've got a clay type soil, then it is going to be really important for you to kind of break up that soil in order to get the air, water, and nutrients better down into the roots of the grass. Another thing that might be causing the bumps would be pests like voles. Voles are like mice or gophers, but they're smaller than gophers, and they can kind of create some tunnels in your lawn. And if you've got voles, then you can either get like some vole deterrent from like your local hardware store or home improvement store. Or a couple of really great ways to get rid of those is if you put eggshells, you can usually see where the voles are entering into their holes. And if you put either eggshells or some form of urine, like dog urine or human urine or something like that, those are if you put those in the entrances to their burrows, then that will deter them. They'll move on because they don't like that. So those are a couple of organic ways that you can do that. Now, the third thing is worms. A lot of times you'll have worms in your soil, and they'll create pilings, and those pilings become kind of the bumpy side of things. Worms are great. So if that's what you've got, then what I would suggest is top dressing with some kind of organic matter, some kind of just a soil, some kind of a soil that you can get that has some good nutrients in it. Top dressing the low parts there so that they come up to the bumpy parts. And then the grass will just naturally grow through that, and it'll kind of it'll level it out a little bit. What I would not recommend, you can take something and roll it in order to get those bumps level. But if you roll it, it compacts the soil. And if you compact the soil, then again, the air, water, and nutrients have a harder time getting down into where the roots are. And so I generally wouldn't recommend it on that side. So either aerate or top dress with a good organic soil, or if you've got pests in there like voles, then use either a natural or not a herbicide. What's it called? The other thing.
I know. I don't know. Well, you know what?
Pesticide. It's a pest. Pesticide. So use a pesticide to get rid of them. So those are a couple different ideas for you.
I love it. Yeah, it's the one time you can tell your kids, hey, it's okay to go pee outside. You just need to go pee right there.
Yes, right in that hole. That's it. Exactly. And make sure it's not when the neighbors are looking.
That's right. Wait until dark, and then you can go out there. That is so funny. I didn't know that. That's so interesting. And so if it happens to be worms and you're needing to top dress, you were just saying that it's okay to bring it up to that same level, or should you do gradually, or?
Yeah, it's okay to bring it up to that same level. Again, the grass will naturally just break through that soil and it'll grow in where that soil's at. So I would just, on your low spots, just top dress with the good soil and it'll fill in. You can top dress and then overseed if you want. If you're going to overseed, I would recommend that you use like a bluegrass blend. And bluegrass blends take anywhere between 14 and 21 days to germinate. So again, the middle of the summer, you're going to have to keep that wet enough. So if you're thinking about top dressing and then overseeding, I would say make sure that you wait until either the middle of the fall or the middle of the spring to do that rather than in the middle of the summer.
Gotcha. Okay. That's perfect. All right. We've got a question here from Jamie, and she's asking, what can we do about the brown spots from where the dog pees?
Jamie, I've got a really, really good solution for you. It's organic and everything. So put 1 tablespoon of vinegar per gallon of water, of drinking water. in your dog's drinking water. And what that does is it changes the acidity of the urine, and then that helps with the brown spots. So it's a simple thing. Again, 1 tablespoon per gallon of drinking water, and that should do enough to prevent new ones. If you've got some larger spots that are there from earlier that are not growing back in, then rake out the dead grass and overseed, and that should just fill in just fine. But going forward, 1 tablespoon of vinegar and you're good.
I had absolutely no idea. Okay, every time I talk to you, I learn something that I'm just like, okay, I will remember this the rest of my life. This is amazing. My dog just passed away, unfortunately, but that's one of the reasons why my husband doesn't want to get another one. He's like, it's so nice to not have any brown spots in the lawn.
Yeah, and usually, you usually only see those brown spots with females, and that's because of the way that they urinate. They crouch instead of lifting a leg. If they lift a leg, then it usually goes in, it disperses a little bit better than being in one concentrated area. So, if you have a female dog and you've got the dog spots, just do that. 1 tablespoon of vinegar per gallon of drinking water.
Okay, that's amazing. That is such a good tip.
Now tell your husband that you need a new puppy.
I know, I'm just thinking that. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go searching right now. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. All right, let's see. Here we have another question that says, I have a weed patch where I want to put down sod. Should I remove the weeds until and add something like soil pep and then level them out and lay the sod? Husband wants to till in the weeds, and I'm thinking we'll just end up with another batch of weeds. So that's a question from Leslie.
Okay, Leslie, I would say, so again, your first suggestion is probably the best, and that is to get rid of the weeds, till in some soil pep, and then lay the sod. If you are laying healthy sod, it should create a weed barrier, so you could till that into the ground. But if it's at seed stage already, then when those seeds will lay dormant and look for any opportunities to rear their ugly heads. So the grass, when it is in the middle of the summer and it's kind of naturally not as strong as the spring and the fall, then at those points you might see some of those weeds come and poke up in the middle of the grass. So again, if you're doing this in the middle of the summer and you're laying sod down, I would suggest that you remove the weeds, and especially any of the seed pods that the weeds have, before putting the grass down. If you're doing it in the spring or the fall, then there's less of a likelihood of that happening, because the grass will take hold and will root in before any of those weeds can re-establish themselves.
Well, geez, we're out of time. Can you believe it?
No, I could talk all day.
I know. So could I. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Eric, and answering these questions. I know that the Utah Gardener Group is going to be really thankful, and I can't wait to send them the link to this podcast. Thanks so much for being here again, and I can't wait to have you back on the show.
It really is my pleasure. And anytime anybody has any questions, we've got a residential lawn care guide on chanshare.com. And then you can call the office. If you've got questions, you can send us pictures and we can let you know what the best way to address any of the issues that you have. The office number is 866-SOD-EASY.
866-SOD-EASY. Perfect. Well, Eric, we'll see you again soon. And thanks again for being here on Gardening Utah.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Gardening Utah. As always, let me know what you'd like to see on the show. Send me a message on Instagram. The handle is @GardeningUtah. Thank you so much to Eric Marble of Chanshare Sod Farms for joining me today and giving us so many great lawn care tips. And thank you for listening. I hope you really enjoyed this show. Thank you to ProgressivePlants.com for sponsoring this episode. And when you support our sponsors, you support our show. So make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening now. Shout out to my producer, Lambo. I'm Jana Francis. Thank you so much for listening to Gardening Utah, and we'll see you next week. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah. Available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.